Picture a suburban street in America in 1975. It's a Tuesday afternoon, just after 3 o'clock. School just let out, and within 20 minutes, that street is alive. 6 kids on bikes cutting through driveways, a group of younger ones playing kickball in a cul-de-sac, 2 more sitting on a curb, arguing about baseball cards. Nobody's wearing a helmet. Nobody has a phone. No parent is standing in a doorway watching. The kids are just out there, doing what kids do, which is mostly making things up as they go. Nobody knows exactly where they are. Nobody's worried. The rule is simple. Be home when the streetlights come on. Now flash forward to today. Walk down that same kind of street on a Tuesday afternoon and look around. The driveways are empty. The cul-de-sac is silent. The sidewalks, if there even are sidewalks, are completely clear. If you look hard enough, you might spot a kid through a window, sitting a few feet from a parent, looking at a screen. The street hasn't changed much. The houses look similar. The yards are still there. But the children have vanished. An entire category of daily life just quietly disappeared, and most people barely noticed it going. Something happened to American childhood. Something deep and structural and almost impossible to reverse. And it didn't happen for one reason. It happened because of a chain of events, each one seeming reasonable on its own, that together turned the American street from a place where children lived into a place where children are no longer allowed. Here's the number that should stop you cold. 50 years ago, nearly half of all kids in America walked or biked to school every single day. It wasn't a choice or a lifestyle or something special families did. It was just what happened. Kids walked to school. Today, that number has collapsed to under 13%. We didn't just change a commute. We eliminated an entire daily ritual of independence that children had practiced for generations and replaced it with nothing. To understand what we lost, you have to spend some real time understanding what childhood actually looked like before it changed. In post-war American neighborhoods, from roughly the late 1940s through the 1970s, the street outside the front door was not just where kids played. It was where they grew up. It was where they learned things no classroom could teach. How to negotiate with someone bigger than you. How to handle losing. How to build something out of nothing on a Saturday afternoon with nobody telling you what to do. 3 things made this possible, and none of them were accidents. First, there was what we can call low-stakes neighborhood trust. Parents assumed, without ever having to say it out loud, that other adults in the neighborhood were loosely keeping an eye on things. Not formally, not obsessively, just the way adults do when they happen to be out in their yards or looking out their windows. The neighborhood itself was a kind of informal safety net, not because everyone knew everyone intimately, but because people were simply present enough to notice if something was wrong. Second, there was nothing competing for a child's time indoors. No smartphones, no tablets, no streaming services, no social media, no video game console offering an alternative reality more immediately rewarding than the actual street. If you were a kid and it was a summer afternoon, outside was the only real option. Boredom pushed you out the door, and the door led somewhere worth going. Third, and this is the one that urban planners and researchers have written about extensively, there was what Jane Jacobs, in her landmark 1961 book, called Eyes on the Street. Busy, walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods are self-policing. When people are out walking, sitting on porches, running errands on foot, there are always eyes around. That presence alone makes a street feel safe and function safely. It deters problems before they start. The children playing outside in 1965 were safe not because nothing bad ever existed in the world, but because the neighborhood itself was alive enough to watch over them without anyone having to try.
Then came 1979, And everything changed. On the morning of May 25th, 1979, a 6-year-old boy named Etan Patz left his family's apartment in the Soho neighborhood of Manhattan to walk 2 blocks to his school bus stop. It was the first time his parents had ever let him make that walk alone. He was so excited about it that his mother had taken his photograph before he left. He wore a blue corduroy cap and carried a small bag. Somewhere in those 2 blocks, Etan Patz disappeared. He was never found. He was never seen again.
The case stopped the country. Etan Patz's face, that small boy with blonde bangs and a gap-toothed smile, became one of the first photographs ever printed on a milk carton under the word missing. For the first time in American history, parents sitting down to breakfast in Iowa or Arizona were looking at the face of a missing child while their own children ate cereal next to them. The image of danger was no longer abstract. It was right there at the kitchen table. 2 years later, in July of 1981, a 6-year-old boy named Adam Walsh was abducted from a Sears department store in Hollywood, Florida, while his mother stepped away briefly. He was murdered. His father, John Walsh, turned his grief into a national movement that produced the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the Milk Carton Program, and eventually America's Most Wanted, a television show that brought the imagery of predators and victims directly into living rooms across the country every single week. President Ronald Reagan named May 25th, the anniversary of Etan Patz's disappearance, National Missing Children's Day. The phrase stranger danger entered school curriculums, police department pamphlets, public service announcements, and the daily vocabulary of American parenting. This is what started the unraveling. Not gradually, not slowly, almost overnight. Before Etan Patz vanished, there wasn't really a cultural framework in America for the specific terror of a stranger taking your child off a safe, familiar street in broad daylight. After him, that terror was everywhere. It spread to parents in towns where nothing like that had ever happened, and where statistically nothing like that was likely to happen. It spread anyway, because fear doesn't follow statistics. Fear follows stories, and these were the most emotionally devastating stories the country had ever been asked to absorb. And then, just as the fear had done its work on one generation of parents, the screens arrived and finished the job on the children themselves. From roughly 2007 onward, with the arrival of the smartphone and accelerating through the 2010s with tablets and social media platforms built specifically to hold a young person's attention for hours, children gained access to something that the outdoors, in all its unstructured glory, could not easily compete with. Immediate reward, constant stimulation, social connection without physical risk. If a parent in the 1980s was afraid to let a child outside, at least the child was bored enough to push toward the door. By 2012, that pressure was gone. The indoors had become genuinely more interesting than the street, or at least it was engineered to feel that way. The double lock was complete. Fear had made parents reluctant to send children out. Screens had made children reluctant to go. Let's look at what the numbers actually show, because they are more dramatic than most people realize. Just 27% of children today say they regularly play outside near their homes. Among the baby boomer generation, that number was 71%. Among people who are in their late 50s and early 60s right now, the number was 80%. 3 out of 4 of them were outside regularly. Today it is fewer than 1 in 3. The University of Michigan's Institute for Social Research found that the average American child between the ages of 6 and 17 spends just 7 minutes a day in unstructured outdoor play. 7 minutes. That is less time than it takes to eat a bowl of cereal, and it represents a 50% decline in just 2 decades. A 2002 psychology study asked elementary school children to draw a map of their route to school. The children who walked alone produced detailed, accurate drawings full of landmarks, shops, trees, and street corners. They knew their world because they had actually moved through it on their own. The children who were driven produced drawings so vague and disoriented they could barely be recognized as maps of a real place. They had made that trip hundreds of times and still couldn't find it in their own memory. They had never actually been inside it. A 1990s Swiss study found that children with genuine independent mobility spent twice as much time outside and had more than double the number of friends compared to children whose outdoor time happened only under direct parental supervision. Twice the time outside. Twice the friends. All from simply being allowed to walk out the door alone. And only 6% of American children between the ages of 9 and 13 now play outside unsupervised at all. 6%. Neither generation was wrong, exactly. The parents of the 1980s who pulled their kids inside weren't foolish or weak. They were responding to real headlines, real grief, real cases that destroyed real families. The fear was human and understandable. And the screens of the 2010s offered genuine convenience, genuine connection, genuine moments of learning. Nobody made a villainous choice. Every step in the chain made some kind of sense in the moment it was taken. But consequences don't require villains. The cost has been real and measurable. Children raised with less independent outdoor time are lonelier. They report a weaker sense of community, a lower sense of personal safety despite being statistically safer, and fewer meaningful friendships. Researchers who track childhood well-being have found that adults who played freely outdoors as children have better mental health outcomes as adults, lower anxiety, lower rates of depression. The freedom wasn't just fun. It was building something that can't be built indoors, a sense of self that knows how to exist in the world without being supervised. Here is the quiet irony that sits at the center of all of it. Juvenile crime victimization in America has fallen dramatically over the same period that childhood freedom has been collapsing. In 1993, there were 44 crimes per 1,000 juveniles in the United States. By the late 2000s, that number had fallen to just 12 per 1,000. Children today are objectively safer from crime than they were in the decade when the fear was at its height. The danger decreased. The restrictions increased. We built a cage around a generation that was statistically freer from threat than the generations that played outside with no supervision at all. The street full of children used to say something. It said that this neighborhood trusts itself. It said that childhood is allowed to be a little uncontrolled, a little risky, a little out of sight. It said that growing up requires some room to wander and some permission to get slightly lost. Somewhere between a missing boy's photograph on a milk carton in 1979 and a 6-year-old watching a screen on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in 2026, we stopped saying that. We pulled the children inside. We locked the door with fear on one side and a glowing screen on the other. And then we wondered why the street felt so empty. Why a whole generation of children grew up knowing every corner of the internet and not a single shortcut through their own neighborhood. Maybe the real question isn't why American kids stopped playing outside. Maybe it's what we were really trying to protect them from when we decided the world wasn't safe enough to let them try. So tell me, were you a free-range kid? Did you ride your bike to places your parents didn't know about and come home with grass stains and no explanation? And what about the kids in your neighborhood right now? When did you last see them outside without a parent standing 3 feet away? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if this kind of story resonates with you, there's a video right here about what killed the American mall. the place that used to be the center of teenage life in this country, and what disappeared from childhood the day the doors finally closed.